Good afternoon, good morning. My name's Fiona Stewart. I'm part of the long-term finance team at the World Bank. I'm based here in Washington, so apologies for the recording due to the time zone. I wish I could be with you physically, as well as in time zones in London, but thank you very much for the invitation and great to talk to you all today. I wanted to run through some of the trends that we're seeing globally at the bank. We obviously work globally in a lot of emerging markets around the world in different regions, on what we're seeing in terms of green and sustainable banking after the impact and through the impact of the COVID and the pandemic, which is obviously hitting our client countries globally. Three things I wanted to run through. One was a little bit about the immediate green markets, the green financial markets. Two, about the regulatory push and the regulatory developments that we're seeing. And then three, just some frontier, leading edge areas that we're seeing some developments on, which I think are quite interesting and be great to hear about what's happening from the UK as well. So in terms of the markets, obviously we're doing a lot of work in terms of the Build Back Better. The post-COVID stimulation packages are starting to be thought of. We're working from the immediate stimulation. We had at the bank about 160 billion package we put together for over about 100 countries that we've been working in. We're starting to think of the next phase and how you build green finance and a sustainable recovery into the packages that the countries are putting together. Many countries were actually seeing sort of very good embedding of climate, of nature, of using this as an opportunity to address these issues as well as the immediate health and job crisis. Countries like Korea, which did a very good job last time in terms of from the financial crisis, its green recovery. Countries like Pakistan, Egypt, a lot of things like renewable energy packages going in there. Things like land. Pakistan has dedicated a whole new set of national parks and land restoration as part of their recovery. So other countries less so. To be honest, it's mixed, but some we're actually seeing putting sustainability and green at the heart of their stimulus packages, which is something we're very much supporting at the bank. To support that, you obviously need green finance, and the green bond and green loan markets are very much developing globally. We've seen issuance coming out from countries all over the world. And I think what's interesting in the green markets is how it's spreading geographically from Europe to Asia and to Latin America and to other countries, but also spreading, I think, in terms of topic. So it started very much with green bonds, very much in the renewable energy sector. We're starting to see moves to sectors like water, transport, and also broader from green bonds to sustainable social bonds. Some of the immediate recovery to the COVID, we saw some of the development banks, for example, in Europe, issuing COVID bonds to support the health systems and the immediate recovery for small businesses. And we saw things like the pension funds buying some of those COVID bonds issued by the development banks. So it's broadening from a green market to a social market, and that's a trend we're seeing. Mexico issued a sovereign SDG bond last week, which was very, very well supported and very oversubscribed. So the green bond, green loan market is certainly developing. And I think beyond banks, the pension funds, etc., the capital markets are getting involved. And then a second trend in terms of regulation, still very much we're seeing the green agenda being embedded into the regulatory frameworks globally. The central banks are very much leading. Many of you I know will know and have maybe involved with the NGFS, the Network for Greening the Financial System. They're doing very good work in terms of looking at green regulation, starting, I think, with reporting regulation, starting with things like taxonomies and labels, but also looking to see can or should prudential regulation also have a green angle to it. In countries like China, we've seen the central bank in China, they have green credits, a green credit market, which then affects the cost of capital of the banks. And they're moving again to other sectors. The Chinese regulators are looking at leasing, at securities, at the pension sector. In countries like Bangladesh, they actually have a target now for green lending from the banks. So very much led by the central banks. And again, it's going global. We know the ECB is very much looking at this question of beyond market neutrality. The TCFD, I'm sure many of you will know and have been involved with the Task Force for Climate Financial Disclosure. Our UK colleagues are very involved in the TCFD and making that very much global and very much accepted. So very interesting developments from the regulators. One thing I think we've seen globally is that where this is really working is when the regulators and the industry, such as yourselves, works very closely together. So there's many of these task forces coming together for greening the financial system. We've seen that the UK have a very good roadmap for their green financial system. We know the regulators in Mexico, again, for example, are coming together to form one. Many other countries. So where you have this partnership between the regulators and the industry working closely together is where we really can start to see green markets really starting to come together. Colombia is another good example. We're working with the regulators in Colombia at the moment and very closely involved in discussions with the industry, the banking sector and the non-banking sector, insurance and pensions, to really embed green into the financial sector in Colombia. And then finally, I just wanted to finish on a couple of issues which I think are interesting and are very much frontier and leading edge at the moment. One is a topic and one is an instrument. On the topic side, we're hearing a lot about nature. So biodiversity is the new climate. Biodiversity is where climate was 5 years ago. How do we build nature risk, biodiversity risk into our risk assessments for balance sheets of the financial sector, and also for opportunities? How do we invest in nature protection and conservation, nature-based solutions? This is very much a growing area. We've just had we mentioned the TCFD, a TNFD, Task Force for Nature Financial Disclosure, has recently been launched. And that's following again to see what data is needed, what targets are needed, how do we report on this? The DNB, the Dutch central bank, was the first central bank to do an assessment to try and see if how nature risk affects the financial sector, the balance sheet of the financial institutions in the Netherlands. So this is very much a developing area. It's difficult. Climate, you have one target, you have more of a measure. Nature is much broader, it's much more diffuse. We don't have the numbers there yet, but it's very much coming. So I think nature as the new climate is one, I think, post-COVID in a green and sustainable banking and financial sector. I think it's an area that's very much coming. And on the instrument side, one interesting thing we're seeing is this idea of sustainable linked loans or sustainable linked bonds. And therefore, I think the market is moving, the green, the sustainable finance market is broadening from use of proceeds, labeled bonds like green bonds, to this idea of sustainable linked. So you actually have performance indicators, which if the borrower hits, the actual change of the cost of capital will change. We've seen, again, I'm sure many of you know, some of the energy sector, we've seen some of these, the health sector, food sector, but there's a lot of interest in these sustainable linked loans. The difficulty is finding the right KPIs, the right indicators that are robust, are stretch, are enough of an ambition, are easily measured. But I think it's an interesting area and one where I think we can see more developments and hopefully really start to see impact. So the financial instruments really are linked to impacts and outputs. And I think that's a very interesting area that's starting to grow. So that's a whistle-stop tour of some of the things that we at the World Bank are seeing globally in the green and sustainable market. What I will say, it's growing, there's no question, it's coming. It's broadening, it's geographically growing, it's deepening in terms of the depth of the markets, and it's also broadening in terms of the type of products and the type of topics that are being covered. We're doing a lot of work from taxonomies, from data to instrument creation, very much leading edge in the UK. I know a lot of your counterparts are very much leading edge in this area, and we would be delighted to follow up with you in future. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I hope to follow up with you all in future. Thanks.